the cameras off. And if everyone could remain on mute while not speaking, that would also be great. Thank you. When we open for questions later on, please could use the raise hand function or the chat function to ask questions, and everyone is encouraged to share this event on social medias or reshare the Foundation's tweets. So the Twitter handle will be available in the chat. A bit of it before we begin, I guess, a bit of a quick note about the Patchwork Foundation. And, you know, on a personal note, I think the work they do is really important, especially now more than ever, as the younger generation find ways to sort of navigate life, future prospects and their aspirations in the wake of the pandemic. It's really important young people feel involved in society, and the Foundation Masterclass actively supports this. And the Foundation really wants to promote and encourage participation in the upcoming elections. So this session is very apt. So Sian, good to see you here. Thank you very much for joining this evening. I'm going to quickly give you a brief introduction to Sian, and then we'll kind of move on with the session. So Sian Berry is a Green London Assembly member and candidate for mayor in 2021. She's previously been the Green Party candidate for the Mayor of London in 2008 and 2016, and is a local councillor in Camden. And she's also been the co-lead of the Green Party since 2018. Sian is a long-time determined and committed campaigner for climate issues, and her dedication and success in this is reflected by the fact that in the last election for mayor in 2016, she won more second preference mayor votes than any other candidate. So thank you so much for joining us today, Sian. I'm going to welcome you to speak for about 10 minutes about your sort of vision for London and your key priorities, if that's okay, and then we can open the floor to questions.
Sure. My brief was to talk about my journey in politics, so I start off with that. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I know Patchwork quite well, and I know part of your mission is to encourage more people to get involved. That is your thing. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into politics and what happened to me next, basically. And that does obviously lead through into the themes of my manifesto. I think we'll have lots of questions. I hope there'll be questions from the audience that draw out more of the detail, but I want to talk about some of those principles. So yeah, first of all, I came very late into politics. I was not politically active as a very young person. I became politically aware after I left university. When I started to work in the real world, I moved to London. I just started to pay more attention, and very much quickly realized that there was a lot wrong with the world, that the climate change that had been warned about while I was like doing my GCSEs and my A-levels, that I thought would probably have been sorted out by now, really hadn't been sorted out. And there were also more and more social justice type issues that I was really seeing. You know, I was a young person struggling in London. I had lots of friends who were struggling. I was seeing how badly the benefit system was serving people, how hard housing was. And this was before, this wasn't before things were difficult, but it was before many more years of very high rent inflation. It was still very difficult to be young in London then. So yeah, there were various global issues around in about 1999. There were big protests against big new global trade deals that were going to like hurt local economies, hurt the global south, and then there were things that were genuinely being protested about on the streets, and I became politically aware. So I started picking up everyone's leaflets, and I really picked up the Green Party's leaflets and went, yeah, these are my people, effectively. And I recognized in them a lot of principles that I support and values, things that are in their philosophical basis and their core values, which have hardly changed since I've been a member. And they're really solid. They're really strong principles of social justice and global justice and environmental justice not being things you can divide, that you must come up with things that respect human rights and that solve all of these problems at once, and that this is entirely possible and that it's something worth fighting for, effectively. And so in my mid-20s I left a job that I was doing, working as a copywriter, writing marketing materials for big pharmaceutical companies. I decided that was not what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, even though it's quite fun. Writing is a good thing. I thought, well, I'll take my skills and I'll use them for good. So I joined the Greens. They got me to help write their website, and I started going to local meetings, and pretty soon they'd got me, first of all, delivering lots of things through people's doors, knocking on doors and talking to voters, but then standing for election. And I very nearly won my first election. It was very close. I was within 40 votes of becoming a councillor the first time I stood. And when you get that close, you pretty much, you're sucked in. Then you have to keep trying until you get elected, and that's basically what happened. And I've had a lot of interviews in this election where people have asked me about this. Why did you join the Greens? Did some incident in your life make it happen? And I realized that the answer I give, I looked at the world and I realized it was broken and I better do something about it, and then just fully committing to do that. Basically the same answer that Greta Thunberg gives, except she realized 10 years before me, when she was 16, not when she was 26. So well done to her. And I'd see, when I go now as a politician, going and talking to younger people in schools, in universities, that actually the way that you're much more in touch with the world, that you're not sheltered from the world, that you are, this can be stressful, we know that there are issues with young people's mental health from the stress of being part of the world in that kind of very hyper connected way, but it also makes you much more politically aware at a much younger age, and you can genuinely get involved and do things in lots of different ways too. So that was my journey into being a politician. The other thing I did when I changed my career is I started to try to work as a campaigner, and I started off volunteering, working with local Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace groups on local campaigns, things like trying to stop GM foods or renewing nuclear power. And then I worked out, we cooked up between us, 3 of us from different groups in Camden, a campaign against 4x4s. And that led me into being eventually professionally a transport campaigner. And then that was my job. And there I worked all around the country and learned from people who'd worked on road campaigns in the 1990s when I was just sitting around being a sixth former. They were out trying to stop new roads being built, setting up protest camps, and working out how to stop a big roads program from going ahead by fighting these individual battles and going to the courts and things like that. And I learned so much in that job. I learned particularly the value of allies, of a diverse group of people from different walks of life, with different starting points, coming together, all calling for the same thing. That is the most powerful thing. You can change any government's mind if you've got the public and a group of unlikely allies who've teamed up to fight for something. You can get almost anything out of any government that way. And that's something I've brought into the London Assembly. I was the candidate for mayor in 2016, and that was when I was first elected to my current job, which is now my full-time job on the London Assembly. And that is the attitude I brought in. I wanted to work with allies, campaigners, local residents who are affected by the same thing in lots of different parts of London, bring their voices into City Hall and get them working to change the mayor's policies. And I also moved from what had traditionally been quite a lot of green issues. You can see in transport, we were working with we were getting young people who'd had their buses cut and therefore couldn't get to colleges in towns and cities across the country. We were bringing their voices to party conferences to speak directly with MPs. And that's the kind of thing that I then started to apply to new areas like housing and policing and rights. That's the areas I've worked on most in City Hall. And there we've got some things changed. I mean, certainly I was the current mayor will tell you, and I don't know if he did when you had your conversation, but he will tell you when asked that it was the research I did showing the impact of cuts to youth services on young people in London. And that work had come from listening to young people in London saying this was happening. I got the numbers, put them to the current mayor and persuaded him to put money in. And the £70 million has gone back into youth services due to this work. We've also got him to start talking about rent controls, which is quite a that's quite a big policy. That's something that he was a bit shy of talking about. But the pressure from working with groups like the London Renters Union, Generation Rent, again, getting data and showing the impact on people, he's actually talks about that quite enthusiastically now and says it's one of his favourite policies of mine, which is a good thing as well. So we've managed to make some changes. But I do want to be the mayor. That's why I'm here today. I want to be the mayor who's coming up with these things first time. And my manifesto is here. It's long, and this is just the sort of thing that made me join the Green Party, the fact that we produce long documents with lots of detail. But this manifesto it's 132 pages, and it is full of ideas that have come from Londoners. It comes from the work me and my colleague Caroline Russell have done in the London Assembly, the work, the things we've tried to get the current mayor to do and not done necessarily, those are in there as proposals. But also from a process, because the election was put off this time last year. So we've spent almost 2 years now having workshops and listening sessions and meetings with people all around London, seeking their ideas to go into this. And we've tied it all together into a programme. And I'm incredibly proud with how the process is reflected in the contents. There's a whole chapter on changing where power lies. There's a lot of commitments to continue listening and working with Londoners, and also lots of principles and new goals that have come from quite creative discussions with people. Things like wanting to set a goal to have 0 murders in London, things like a 0 road deaths policy. Those come from discussions with young people, with Greens, about what the goals of London should be, what we should be aiming for, and how that might change your perspective and how to deal with things as well. I hope we can talk more about that. So finally, just to pitch me for mayor as why you should vote for me. This manifesto is a plan. It's a plan for a real green recovery and absolute transformation of London into something amazing that I think you can and should vote for in this election. We want to build a recovery that builds everybody up, that closes the gaps in the system, and where we all work together to build a secure future. Those are the principles and the plans, and there's lots of detail in there, and we can genuinely do this. We should be a world leading green city, the greenest city in the world, and I think we can get there if we all work together alongside a green mayor.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think, yeah, that is, an extremely comprehensive overview, and really touches on the key issues facing Londoners at the moment. So I guess in that context, I know you touched on it a bit, as Patchwork is a charity for sort of young people. I know you mentioned housing and listening and making sure, and your previous work with sort of making sure young people have access to transport and the things that are important to them. What else would you say are your current priorities for young people in London?
There are lots of policies in here that would help young people and older people as well. I mean, private renting, there's this assumption that it's just younger people. I'm a private renter. I'm 46 years old and I still live in a private rented flat. Lots of people are in my position, earning an average wage and unable to save up. And I don't earn an average wage anymore, but it's only been 3 years, only 5 years. So I've not managed to save up for a flat myself yet either. But we did work quite closely with the Young Greens. The Green Party has a big branch of us. We've got a lot of young people in the Green Party, and they put together priorities for me and new ideas that have gone into the manifesto. So I'm just going to run through a few of those. I mean, obviously youth services is there. We want to make sure there's a guaranteed youth service, youth workers particularly, available to support young people. The work I've done pushing for youth services to be funded also means I've spent a lot of time talking to the youth work sector, the people who are youth workers, and I genuinely believe that every young person needs not just their parents and their teachers, and if they get if there is trouble, social workers helping them. I think every young person needs also that other adult who's non-judgmental support and mentor for them, to make sure they hear other perspectives and make sure they can go and get help outside the family, outside the school at any point. I think that's just incredibly important. So that's obviously in there. The road deaths and reducing road danger, that really comes from young people, because young people don't drive much these days. Young people are dependent on public transport and also would like to be able to safely walk and cycle around the city. And I think those targets, to make sure that we're doing everything to prevent collisions and people being run over on the roads, and doing everything we can to prevent danger on the streets and danger at home, and give people the way to get out before anything gets remotely near to causing someone's death, I think is really important. That preventive public health approach to both those aspects is something that our Young Greens really believe in. Young Greens also, they're passionate about global justice and racial justice and how that interacts with climate change, and also how we can solve these problems at home. So they're very passionate about changing policing, making sure that we've got better involvement and much more accountability. And the policies I want to do to rethink policing from first principles are very, very supported by the Young Greens. But also they bring up, and they're very passionate about, the fact that a lot of the stuff that we use, like our phones and our things in our homes, they use resources, and this isn't just carbon. These are resources that are dug out of the ground, that lead to landscape and ecological destruction in the global south, and these are issues of global justice. And so there's a really strong target to reduce waste and the amount of stuff we go through in the economy by making sure we repair and we reuse more, and we reduce what we need in terms of packaging, and all of that is very in there, and it's intimately tied up with these issues of global justice and wider biodiversity and protection of ecosystems, as well as people's homes. So that's really, really important. Little things too, not little things, these are important things, but things like the School Streets programme, where we want to have no traffic and safe streets outside schools when they're opening and closing. They asked for that to be extended to colleges and universities. And that's something the current mayor hasn't thought of. I hadn't thought of until they brought it to me, and that's a policy that's in there. And then finally, Greens love basic income. Basic income is one of the reasons I joined the Green Party, is because we have this policy of having an unconditional system of a basic income, a welfare system that isn't designed with cracks for people to fall through, lots of conditions, stigma, something with real dignity where everybody is just guaranteed a basic income. I really believe in that. At a London level, we can't bring that in as our policy. We're not in charge of the welfare system, but we can trial it and show that it works. And so we've got some trials of basic income in the manifesto, and one of them is aimed specifically at young people, and we've called it, between us, as me and the Young Greens, we've called it the Creative Autonomy Allowance. And autonomy is a really important word there, and what we want to do there is invest for 3 years £10,000 a year in regular income to 1,000 young Londoners who would like to pursue, and they don't have to have done anything in particular already. There's no conditions here. The idea is it's as open as possible. We'd trial it on a representative group of young people who are interested in creative careers, ones that have current barriers if you haven't got family money and your own safety net behind you, and entrepreneurial careers, but careers to start businesses. And we want to do this for 1,000 Londoners who are young, and then see what impact it has on their opportunities in life. And I think that it'd be really powerful to prove the benefits of a basic income to young people, and it would also just be good to help 1,000 young people in that way. So there you go. Those are some things that the Young Greens have pushed into the manifesto that I really think are amazing, and I really want to get on with doing them.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And within that, I think before I open the floor, I think it's really your focus on sort of global social environmental justice is particularly apt at the moment. You know, there are a number of things going on. You know, COP26, the UN's climate summit, is coming to the UK this this autumn, and you know,
there's
I know
really with that around justice between countries, you know, who can afford to come, and which countries have got the vaccinations. All of that starts to play into that actual conference. It's really, yeah, it's a real microcosm of the injustices that there are.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned in your manifesto kind of that, you know, the impact climate change has a disproportionate impact on less developed countries, and I guess my thought on that is, environmental campaigns are traditionally centred, in the UK at least, or in the Western world, it's traditionally centred around white middle class voters. And I guess, how are you going to sort of make sure, or try and sort of engage it in a wider context to make sure these issues are maybe not so much taken seriously, but more engaged with outside across a wider demographic?
I think that's really important, and it's I've just because it's on Twitter, which none of you go on anymore. It's something called Throwback Thursday today, and one of my colleagues has tweeted my speech from when I was very first the principal speaker of the Green Party, and I gave a speech at the Green Party conference in 2007, and there was a Labour government in at that point, and my speech is all loads of criticism of the government for not making green ways of living cheap and easy, making them a luxury. I literally describe Gordon Brown as making being green a bit of a luxury, and laying it all on laying it all on the individual to change, which can be expensive. And I think that has not helped to make the Green Party's sort of membership as broad as it should be, because people think you need to be super green in your lifestyle in order to join the Green Party. That is not true. You don't have to. The point is, you need to believe in our principles and our core values. And so, yeah, we need to make sure that the greenest ways of living are the cheapest, are the easiest. The green products should not be more expensive. For one thing, they don't go through as many resources, so there's no reason for them to be the most expensive, except that a lot of green companies want to pay a decent wage and want to not exploit their workers and things. So you often find that the greenest things are more expensive. Well, that needs to be flipped around. We need laws in place to make that completely different. And it is the case that green policies sorting out climate chaos would have the most incredible influence on global justice. Like you said, if we can prevent this happening, then we will be helping to save many people on the very lowest incomes from the worst effects of it. And we'll see that here as well. Once we start to see the impacts of climate change on London, we will start to see the people in the homes that are the coldest and the ones that overheat the most. Once we see flooding, it'll be the people who can't afford insurance who'll be the worst hit. We have to fix this from an equality point of view as well.
Definitely, yeah, I totally hear that. And I think now I probably will kind of open the floor to questions from attendees. So if you could either use the raise hand function, or I think there might be some in the chat, so I don't know. I think first I'll take one from the chat. So this is from Layla. So Layla asks, and if you'd like to ask this yourself, feel free, but give a moment.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask. Hi, I'm Layla and I'm 16. And I was going to say the current waiting time for children's and adolescent mental health services are way too long. How do you plan on improving those kinds of services?
That is a really, really good point. And it is, I mean, it's months, if not over a year, isn't it, to get referred?
Yeah, I've been waiting since last October.
Yeah, and I think crisis care as well for young people's mental health is not good. There's too often that people who are just 18 end up in medical centres that are actually for adults, and we need to have young person specific mental health care there as well. Now, the Mayor of London doesn't run the NHS. The NHS's organisation is extremely complicated, and that is a problem for the NHS. And one thing that Manchester has that we don't is much more control and power over how things are organised and what priorities are set. It's more similar to what we have for the police. So obviously the police run the police, but the mayor sets the priorities for the police and helps control the budget and the priorities of where it goes. And we need that in London as well. The NHS, there are lots of very, very hardworking people in the NHS running things. But I think at a London level, we need to make sure that there is availability of these services to everybody, and we ought to be able to do that, linking up between different parts of the NHS to make sure that happens. So yeah, I'd be a strong advocate for this in the Mayor's office, and I wouldn't be able to put my own money into it through the GLA, but I would be able to make sure that there was good information from people about what was happening, where, what was going on, and how you can access what is available, and put pressure on the government to change the way things are run and put more resources in.
Thank you. So I think we have 2 hands up from Jasmine Jade. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, and then maybe we'll take a question next from Yash. So go ahead.
Thank you. You have said my name correctly. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jasmine Jada George. I'm a member of the London Youth Assembly, and I want to ask you, Sian, about your question. I meant about your idea of raising powers to the London Youth Assembly. So could you please elaborate a bit more? Thank you.
Hello, nice to see you. I'm glad you asked. I'm very excited about this. Again, this comes from the young Greens. I said to them, I want to give more powers to the Youth Assembly. What would you like? What would you like me to do? And they came up with a whole list of things. And what I've done is make a policy that fits in with the current laws, so we don't have to get Parliament to pass this. We can do this straight from City Hall, and a lot of it's to do with giving resources, but also giving more powers. So what I want to do with the London Youth Assembly is give more resources so that you can be more like one of the London Assembly committees that I sit on, so that there is a proper power for you to call people in for investigations, for you to make recommendations that the mayor has to respond to. Hopefully that's me, and has to say, you don't have to go along with all the assembly recommendations as mayor, but you have to give a good reason why not. You are accountable to them. And then once a year, the assembly has a big power and can make a lot of influence. We get to put budget amendments. I'll wave you. This is my budget amendment from this year, and it's full of good ideas, and these are practical ideas, because these amendments have to be signed off and properly made by the finance people, so that if the assembly passes it, it changes the budget. So this is a very powerful way to make change, and this is how I've made change as an assembly member. Each year the Green Party members put a budget amendment. It's all worked out. We find the money from somewhere and we put it into something else. We change what's happening within the budget, and the mayor doesn't, the assembly doesn't vote for it. We're not the majority on the assembly yet, but that plan is then concrete. It is ready to go, and several times now the current mayor has taken up our ideas the following year. He's done the same thing as we said, just a year later. And so I want the Youth Assembly to be able to put a formal amendment in exactly the same way to the mayor's budget. And I've said that the London Assembly will sponsor that to be discussed at the meeting and voted on. And what I said about allies and power and things, I think this is going to be really hard. If I'm an assembly member now, and I know if the London Youth Assembly came to me with a worked up budget amendment that could be done, the pressure on me to say yes would be very, very high. And so I think that's a genuine way of pushing power to the young people on the Youth Assembly to change things within City Hall. And at the moment, I love what you do. You have amazing discussions. You are holding us to account. You bring us, assembly members come before you and talk about our work, and you're able to do things. But those extra powers, the powers to have a mayor's question time where the mayor has to sit down and answer your questions formally, and the written questions that we can put in, which get information back from the mayor, we'll give you those powers as well, and the power to put a budget amendment, so that and then force the assembly to say no if they don't want to do it, and they'll probably say yes. I think that'll be just great, genuine power. You will be able to do real things with your power then. So that all got worked up with the young Greens, and it's all completely feasible. And I genuinely hope that even if I'm not the mayor, that the mayor in the next term might take this idea up, because I think it's really sorely needed, particularly with the pandemic. I think young people are facing a really challenging future, and you already did. And your ideas, your views are going to be important. So we should be resourcing, making sure that they actually count in decision making.
Thank you, Sian. This sounds really good, and it sounds amazing, because we have similar views on making sure young people are heard and and the heart of decisions, because sometimes young people are not listened to. So this sounds really good, and I hope this does come to life. So thank you for answering my question.
Let's join up and make a formal proposal to do this. So that, I could put founding this into my next budget amendment. That might get it done.
Sounds amazing.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. Thank you, Jasmine Jada. I think Yash is next, and then I think we'll take a question from Safia after, and then we have a question in the chat. So Yash, if you could go ahead, please.
Hi, Sean. My name's Yash. I'm 16 years old, and last year I was the chairman of the Barking and Dagenham Youth Council, and we did a poll, and I'm sure this was a London-wide poll as well, regarding the concerns that young people have after coronavirus. What we found was consistently young people, one of their main concerns was housing. Sadiq Khan did promise 80,000 homes every year. However, in the past 5 years, he's delivered 40,000 altogether. What will you be doing to solve the housing crisis in London, to make sure there is affordable housing for the youth as well as older people alike?
Excellent question. Excellent question. So yes, in the 5 years that I've been on the London Assembly, the gap between what Londoners need and what's actually being built has got wider. And it's not just about numbers, it's about the levels of rent and the types of housing that we have. We've lost council homes over that period. We've built some, and you'll hear the current mayor saying that they've started to build council homes again. That's a good thing, but that's not the net figure, because we are still knocking down council homes. So some of the new ones that get built are just replacing ones that have been knocked down. And I fought really hard to try to prevent that happening. We also still have right to buy, and that is a problem, because it does mean every year some thousands of council homes are sold off and are no longer council homes, and they're not being replaced. So that is a real problem. And then we've also got the problem of rising costs in private rented homes. I've been a really strong advocate for rent controls, and I think the solution in the shorter term, the post-pandemic solution to this, is to focus a little bit more attention on pulling homes that already exist into the tenures and the rent levels that we need. So again, my budget amendment this year found £500 million that is currently not allocated within the grant money that we have to give out for new homes. Now, we could push that out and say build more homes, but that takes years. And I think that £500 million is from the money we're supposed to spend by 2023. And I think the best thing we can do with it before 2023 is to buy homes that already exist from developers. If you go down Battersea, Nine Elms, there's a lot of towers there. Those flats are not all sold. Those developers are not having a great time on the global markets right now. They might be very, very well prepared to do us a deal, and then rent out those homes at what's called a living rent to primarily key workers. And those are people who really desperately need, they work full time, they earn the average wage, but they genuinely can't afford to live in London anymore, and those homes would go to them. And then we need to make sure that we can do things like stop right to buy, stop demolishing council homes, so that the ones we build are actually genuinely new, and that would make a difference to the people most in need. My problem with the government, with Sean Bailey's plan to do shared ownership homes, is that all depends on you having some savings in the first place. He said something ridiculous like, if someone asked him, how is a homeless person going to save up a £5,000 deposit? And he just went, oh, they could do that. It's not that hard. And it's like, you have no idea how hard it would be for someone at the bottom of the, falling off the end of the housing market to get 5,000 spare pounds together. It just has no clue. So we need to do something that's genuinely affordable rents that can be paid for out of your wages that week, because that's the problem that we have. And so I want to focus a lot more on reducing the rents for the homes that already exist and pulling more homes out of these private market developments and getting them into properly affordable rents for average workers as well. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I've been on the housing committee. I chaired the housing committee for 2 years this time, so I've really delved into this, and I think that is the answer.
Right. That really answers the question. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Ash. I think we'll take a question from Safia next.
Hi, Sian. So my question to you is, in light of the BLM movement and the growing distrust of the police, what will you do to help bridge the gap and restore the trust between the police and local communities?
There's a lot about that in my manifesto, and I've done a lot of work on this over the years. But it's really come to a head this year. I think the Black Lives Matter movement has genuinely opened up the possibilities for the real reform that we need. What I've been doing is looking every time at all the new tactics the police have brought in, and I have been disappointed that under Sadiq Khan there have been so many changes in policing that have gone in the wrong direction. We've seen stop and search absolutely rocket in terms of the numbers of times it's done, but also the Section 60 orders that they make, which means that they can stop and search you without reason. So those things we carry around which tell you your rights when you're stopped and searched, and you have the right to know why, that all goes out of the window when there's a Section 60 order. And with Jeanette Arnold, who's a London Assembly member, she's been around forever, she's shocked at this as well. We've highlighted the amount of time Section 60 has been ordered for whole boroughs for several days, and that means that even the rights we have are being ignored. And what I've been doing throughout my term is, each time something new like this starts to happen, they start bringing in spit hoods, or they change the rules on tasers, asking, and the coronavirus regulations as well, asking for the data on how it's being used in terms of age and in terms of race, and getting that data back. Every time we do, we see Black young Londoners disproportionately affected by all of these tactics, all of them, right across the board. And that is a pattern we can't tolerate. So my solution to this is, let's rethink policing from first principles. There are some good principles of policing that were brought in the days before we had a police force. So the idea of there being this cohort of citizens who have power over other citizens, who have the power to arrest them, or knock them down, tie them up, deprive them of liberty, that wasn't a thing until we invented it. And when we did invent it, there was some quite deep thought about what to do, what should the principles be. And we've got good principles of policing in this country. They're not a sort of military force. They are supposed to be citizens. Primarily, the police are the people and the people are the police. And the people are supposed to generally police their own behaviour, and the police coming in and exercising force is seen as a failure of a system that ought to be based on mutual trust, where the police are simply citizens who have this power, but they try not to use it. And this is not at all how the police operate at the moment. These principles have kind of gone out the window. So I want to have a citizens' assembly to rethink them, bring everybody together, and put some strong statements out that come from consensus about how policing ought to be done in the future, and then turn that into actions, turn that into a genuine rethink of where the police's resources go, and what their rules of engagement ought to be with the people. And I think that's just really, really important. I don't think it's as simple as tackling each thing one by one. I think there's a bigger problem now. The pattern is too frequent and too embedded. We actually have to disrupt things and really rethink things from principles that mean something to people, and get people in the general population talking about this more as well, and not in such a confrontational way. If we were to plan policing from first principles, what would we do, as opposed to saying just what's wrong now, because I think that's the right way to go about genuine deep reform.
Thank you, Sian, and thank you, Safia. So a quick note, I think at about sort of just before 6:30 we're going to wrap up. We have about 3 questions in line at the moment. So next there's one in the chat. So Sarah, sorry, your microphone's not working, so I will ask this question for you. So Sarah's question is, will you advocate for election reform, and how can we make sure young people have an equal say to unwind, and so that they can unwind the two-party system?
Ah, well, there you go. Yes, I'm a very, very strong supporter of electoral reform. You've probably seen the data from the last couple of general elections, and we've got an amazing MP. I mean, Caroline Lucas, who is a Patchwork friend, she's a great MP. She's worth about 10 MPs on her own, but the amount of votes it takes for the Green Party across the country to elect her is something like 800,000. It's an awful, no, it's more than that. Gosh, it must be millions. So yeah, there's an awful lot of votes that go towards one Green MP, whereas each Labour MP is tens of thousands on average. It's not a system where everybody's vote counts equally, and that absolutely needs to change. It means that because we don't have a proportional system for Westminster like we do for the London Assembly, it means that groups of people who are a large group of people but aren't all living in one constituency can be ignored. And this is true, I think, of, you know, it's true of young people, it's true of disabled people, LGBTIQA plus people, significant groups of the population whose votes as a whole could change who was elected if they swung behind one party or another. They're not all concentrated in a constituency, and so our constituency only based system means they don't really have a voice. And in fact, people in very, very few constituencies have an influence on the election. Now, this is different for London. So I'm elected to the London Assembly, hurrah. And I'm elected that under a system that's proportional. So there's a ballot paper that's orange that comes through your door or is at the polling station. And that one, you just vote for a party. And what that's used to do is to balance up the London Assembly so that the votes that you cast on that ballot paper all count towards electing people. And that is a much fairer system. And that means that issues in London, things like LGBTIQA plus rights, we've been a leader on LGBTIQA plus rights in London, partly because of our election system, partly because we know that if we ignore groups of Londoners like that, then our seats are at stake, and therefore we must listen. That's how you exert power over politicians. In the end, you threaten their votes. And I think we would break open the two-party system if we were to have that system for Westminster. We've seen in Germany that the Greens there, you know, they started off small like us, using a proportional system. They've built up and they've started to do things like run the regions in Germany. They've done that well. They've built up trust, and now they're pretty much challenging to be the next Chancellor of Germany. And there is not a two-party system in Germany, and a lot of the governments they have in Germany are not one-party governments, they are multi-party governments. And to me, that's healthier too. I don't really believe in giving all the power to one party. So yes, I really believe in this. But remember that for the London elections, it's much fairer anyway. You can vote twice for mayor. You have two choices for mayor as well, and you have to vote for different candidates there. So at the very least, you're voting for two parties already, and you do have the choice to vote for who you want for the assembly as well.
Yes, I think it's a succinct summary of why this is important. So thank you, Sarah, for that question. So next we have Nikita.
Hi, Sean. I'd just like to start by saying that it's been lovely to hear your answers so far. I think engagement with young people is so important, and it's been amazing to be involved. So thank you. So I'm a current active member of my constituency's youth council, and I'm also the current deputy chair of the London Youth Assembly. So it's great to hear your last answer. This experience has meant that I've interacted with many young people, and I've often seen major concerns regarding knife crime, as this is something that like disproportionately affects young Londoners. So I wondered whether there were any measures you would take to tackle knife crime with a particular focus on young people.
Yeah, and I said at the beginning that I have set a target for 0 murders, and I think, you know, you've got to make, you can't just have, and we had the current mayor on the BBC debate that we had last week. I mean, he said the same thing, but he didn't put it into practice as his policy. He said my target was unrealistic, but at the same time he said, when asked about a murder, he said 1 death on our streets is too many. Well, if you believe that, that ought to be your target. That is my view. And when you set that target of achieving 0 murders, it's a big challenge. There are very few places in the world with low levels of violence like that. There are some though, like Iceland. It's not the same as London. It's a very small place, but it has virtually no murders. And if we could get down to those levels, we could learn from what they do there and how they genuinely prevent violence in that country. That would be a really good thing. And the perspective you end up with is needing to prevent them at an earlier stage. You know, there's the idea that you could just stop and search everybody on the streets and take the knives away and that would stop violence isn't true. Violence is much more deep-seated than that. It's about feelings and anger and social problems and having an unhealthy society. And when you look at what could have prevented a murder, whether that's a domestic murder or a murder on the streets, there will always be a cause somewhere much earlier. And so looking at those causes, reviewing each murder that takes place, and we do that already for domestic homicides. We do look at whether they could have been prevented, were there support services that were reached out to and didn't act. And I think we should be doing the same thing for every single murder, and then really getting to grips with the causes of violence and then preventing them. And to me, you know, I mean, I've argued for youth services to be restored. I mean, that's just basic. There needs to be a good youth service anyway. Of course, that's going to prevent harm in the end, but that's not its main purpose. My view is that youth work is about helping young people to thrive, but it would have this effect as well. And then other services like mental health services, you know, if somebody's in trouble and very, very angry and you know, suffering, they ought to be able to go and get help. They shouldn't end up committing a murder. We need to be looking at things in a really deep preventive way and building a truly healthy society where violence can't thrive. And that would be the way I would push more resources and try and make sure that that's how we're focusing our attention. Because in the end, if you're putting lots of police onto the streets, it's not good value for money, and you're not getting the extra benefits you would get from building a healthy society where people are, you know, happy and not prey to violence and not suffering and all of those things.
Absolutely, thank you, Sian. So I see that we have another question from Yash. If you'd like to go ahead, please.
Hi, Sean. Me again.
Hello.
Being the representative of Green Party, I think we already know you're very, very passionate about climate change and activism regarding that. What is your action plan and budgeting to ensure that London, the emissions in London go down and we reach net zero as soon as possible?
There's quite a lot about that in the plans, and we've pushed on the Assembly as well. Very early on, we brought the climate emergency motion to the London Assembly. It got passed. We asked for a 2030 target for net zero from the mayor. He said he would do that, and he's sort of spoken about having this target, but he hasn't made the plans, and that bothers me. It is a fact that a lot of things that will help reduce the carbon footprint of London are things that need to change at a government level. There are policies that need to change, things like for the embodied carbon in buildings, changing the VAT rules so that it isn't 15% or 20% more expensive to refurbish a building than knock it down and start from scratch. There's a huge environmental impact of doing that, and that's a government policy that needs to change. Homes, investing in greener homes, we can do some of that at a London level. We can bring councils together, we can make what we're doing more efficient, but really we need a big investment plan from the government. I've talked about, when I was standing to be Prime Minister in the general election, putting £38 billion a year at a government level into greening up our homes. But where the mayor does have power is in transport. And we haven't, again, the mayor hasn't made new plans to get to 2030. He hasn't done that for transport either. So at the moment, his trajectory of reducing emissions brings down, now I'm in mirror, so I don't know which way to do that, brings down the emissions to 2050. And it leaves 2/3 of the work to do after 2030. And that is not good enough, because we have the powers to do all of this with transport. So I've pledged to make sure we have a zero carbon transport system for the whole of London by 2030, and I'll do that using the mayor's powers alone. And that's things like reducing traffic, making public transport cheaper, investing in new public transport, improved buses for the places in outer London where people feel forced to own a car, and really converting all the vehicles that we run, our buses, and making sure that the energy that Transport for London uses is green energy. My colleague Caroline exposed just over a year ago that only 1/1000, so that's 0.01% of the energy used by Transport for London, and there's a lot of electricity used by the tube. It's one of the biggest energy bills in the country. Only 1/1000 of it was coming from renewable energy. That is now changing, because when we exposed that, the current mayor went, okay, that is rubbish. He basically said, yes, that's rubbish, I will do something about it. But we can get that to 100% by 2030, and that really would make London, you know, a real world leader if we could get that transport system cleaned up. There's no reason why it can't be done. We could be halfway there already, and we're not, and it's such a shame.
Thank you. A quick note, so we are coming towards the end of the session, and we have, I think we're finishing at 6:30, and we have 3 questions, so hopefully we'll have time to get them all in, and I'll start with a question in the chat.
I'll answer quickly, sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, honestly, I think these issues are so important to be drawn out, and really to have people understand your vision. So, okay, so actually I'm going to kind of put them all together if that's okay, and then we'll see where we get to. So from Marvin, we've got an outline of questions about, again, young people. So first starting, children in care deserve a chance to fulfil their potential. Would you support the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme in all of the 33 boroughs? And another question from Marvin, London Youth Games. It's a youth competition across, you know, all the boroughs in London. He says, can help to reduce obesity and crime. Were you ever a participant with a team sport? So that's Marvin's questions. I'm going to read the rest of them out. Layla, we also have a question. What will you do about the costs for public transport for under 18s? So if I give you those, and then I think we'll have one final question from Jasmine Jada after that.
Okay, I can tie together 2 of those. So yeah, the Duke of Edinburgh, that's the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme. Yeah, I did that when I was at school. I didn't get my gold award. I sort of lost interest in the middle of 6th form, sorry. But I did really love the fact that they would send us up the hills. I'm from Gloucestershire, so there's quite good hills around us, and we're near Wales. So I used to get out into the countryside and walk, and I love that still. I take long walks around London. I love to go out into the green belt. I've got policies to encourage more people to be able to go out and use public transport to reach country walks and to go and see and be amongst nature. I absolutely love that. So that's the exercise I like to take. Now, I was never really good at sport at school, and that's weird because my family are really good at sport. My dad was a very good rugby player in his day, and we'll tell you about it if you ever meet him. And my little sister was a very good footballer as well. So I just passed me by, sorry. But I do support team sports. I think I'm by family a fan, basically. The public transport costs, yes, it's a bit of a disgrace that the government has tried to attack our free travel for young people. It's one of the least constructive things you can do in the middle of this pandemic. I'm a strong supporter of that, and one of the things I want to do is extend the age limit up as quickly as I possibly can. At the moment, Transport for London's finances are a bit shaky, but a lot of the things I would do would make them more secure. So we want to do more to charge drivers in a fair way for driving by mile. So that would bring in more money. And one of the priorities I would make would be bringing up the age limit so I can bring down fares for young people who are just starting out in their careers. So that's really important to me. I would definitely do that. And there's a question about children in care. That's something that as a counsellor I take very seriously. We're the corporate parents as a council for all the children in care. in Camden, and that is something we genuinely take pride in what we do. We've been pushing for things like no council tax discounts for children leaving care, and lots more support. You know, why shouldn't care leavers get all the support they possibly can? The other thing we've been talking about is, I don't know if this is relevant, but young carers as well. I've signed a pledge to ask the government to make sure that every school has somebody in it who's tasked with supporting young people who are also carers, and that is something I don't know why there isn't that already in schools. It's probably to do with money, and it's something the government needs to help fund, because that's something that the admiration I have for young people who also act as carers is absolutely huge. And if you're making your way through your education, just having someone in the school who's there to help you through any support needs you have, and signpost you to help, and just really, really important.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think we have our last question here, Jasmine, Jada. So please go ahead, and then after we will, if you could stick around after, guys, we're going to take a group photo. So if people want to put their cameras on, obviously, if you're under 16, but yeah. So the next question, and then we'll take a photo.
So obviously, from like hearing from you, I kind of had an idea for, if you do get elected as mayor, to like help young people / communities like build trust with the police force. So it's kind of like a point of view time where people that can share their point of views on the police, how the system is run, and then generally how the police is. This should hopefully help the police like kind of understand people's point of views from different communities. So I kind of wanted to kind of get your views if this is something you feel you could implement or something similar. So,
you know, I think that kind of solution and that kind of action is the sort of thing that might come out of the discussions I've talked about having on a citizens' assembly. It really bothers me the way that restoring trust in the police seems to be very one-sided when you ask the police about it. They want the public to better understand them, and it needs to be the other way around. And I think the point you've made is exactly that. I've got a bit of an issue with police in schools, for example. I'm not sure they're actually a good thing, these Safer Schools officers. I think when you talk to the police about it, what you hear from them is very much that they think the point of these schools officers is to help young people get more used to police, so that, you know, in the future when they're stopped and searched, they won't kick off. I mean, that not literally, that isn't a quote from the police, but that is the kind of attitude that you seem to get back from them. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think a young person's best life is lived very far from contact from the police, and that police in schools perhaps also, you know, when you look at the actions they take, quite often, again, that's disproportionately against young Black people in the schools. So again, it's potentially drawing people into contact with the criminal justice system who shouldn't be anywhere near the criminal justice system. So I do worry about that, and I think, you know, the opposite is probably true. We probably want more of the young people from the schools to go in the police stations to go educate the police officers about what their lives are actually like, because I think there's a bit of a lack of empathy that goes on, and that would really help with that.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So we've come to the end of our session. It's been a really brilliant session, so thank you, Sian. So everyone,
you did so well. Look, we're bang on time. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, too many calls, you know, where you never know what's going to happen. But, you know, I could have listened to this, you know, a lot longer, much longer. So thanks again. So if everyone who would like to be included in the group photo would please turn on their cameras now, that would be brilliant.
Are we holding up get involved? Is this tradition being maintained?
Not today, but that is for the patchwork cohort. So that is a general thing done.
Okay, if everyone can turn their cameras on if they want to, and we'll get a smile. Great, thanks everyone.
Okay, so yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the session. So I would like to say a massive thank you to you, Sian, and a huge thank you to all our young Londoners and young people who have joined the session. And just thank you for giving up your time again this evening.
Thank
It's
you.
been brilliant to hear the level of detail, passion, and drive that you have behind all of these manifesto pledges. So thanks again to the sponsors of this session, Letter One, and please everyone remember to vote next Thursday. As Sian said, there are 2 options, and it's worth noting that Sian is one of 20 mayoral candidates this year, and you can find the list of full candidates. I think it will be in the chat box. So yeah, again, thank you very much everyone for attending, and thank you, Sian. It's been brilliant.
Thank you so much, and I hope I'll be re-elected. If I'm not mayor, I'll hopefully be on the London Assembly as well. Don't forget you have 2 votes for mayor, and I hope we can meet up after the election, particularly the members of the Youth Assembly, to make a plan for how we get you more powers.
Great, thank you and good evening everyone.
Thank you.